Alireza's rise to number 2 in the world rankings and 2,800 at such a young age is matched only by Magnus Carlsen in the modern era. In fact, Alireza will have two opportunities in 2023 and in 2025 to become the youngest world chess champion of all time. He has honed his skills in online chess, playing tens of thousands of games on Chess.com, and in this video, we are going to show you 5 of our favorite brilliant moves that he's played on our site. Our first brilliant move comes from a bullet game against the speed demon Andrew Tang. In this position, Alireza has just played the excellent knight to h5, inducing the response rook to g8. This move does look a little bit awkward, and in general, black's development seems a bit awkward, but things shouldn't be too bad, right? After all, the queens are off the board, black has some development, and the position is symmetrical. However, things are very, very bad. And that is because Alireza now plays the bomb bishop to h6, a crushing and visually striking move. The immediate threat is simply to capture on g7, and the capture of g7 will wreck the black position. Of course, the critical question is, can black capture the bishop on h6? Well, not safely, as happens in the game. We get pawn captures h6, but now knight to f6 check. The g-pawn has been pulled away from the defense of this critical square. Knight to f6 check is a fork, hitting the king and the rook, and of course the bishop cannot capture because of the pin on the e-file. The king steps over to f8, which is the only way to continue to defend the rook on g8. But now knight takes g8, and the king cannot capture because of rook takes e7. Alireza is stealing an exchange and wrecking the black position. However, there is one try left, trapping the knight on g8. The knight is threatening, of course, to capture this bishop and to get out by capturing the pawn at h6. So bishop to g5 is the only sensible move, defending against both threats. In this position, though, simply h4, attacking the bishop, and if the bishop goes to d2, then it can simply be attacked again, with rook to e2, and in fact, there are a number of winning moves. The knight will not be trapped over here. Alireza is getting the knight out of there, and after h4, bishop takes h4, he simply played knight takes h6. Both bishops are hanging, and in this position, on move 21, Grandmaster Tang resigned. Our next example features another visually striking move in the opening. Alireza has just played queen takes b7, and black defended with rook c8, holding the knight on c6. It's very, very clear that black's position is bad. The king is stuck in the middle of the board, and you have basically a whole kingside to develop before you can castle. Simple developing moves are good, very strong in fact, but Alireza is sharp-eyed and finds a chance to finish the game on the spot. It is the move knight to d6 check. Another brilliant move that seems to advance the knight to a square where there's everything defending, the pawn on the e-file and the queen on d8. However, if the pawn captures, then there is queen captures on f7 with a typical scholar's mate. And in the game, the queen does capture, you have no other legal move, but now you have queen captures on c8 check, stealing an exchange and just crushing the black position. Black did play this and try to resist, but Alireza easily won the game. Alireza and Hansen have played many battles on Chess.com, and both players have landed some beautiful shots. In this game, though, it is Alireza who gets the upper hand after many twists and turns. Here he plays the shocking rook to d5, an incredible interference sacrifice. Yet again, Alireza is playing a piece to a square that seems to be impregnably defended. In this case, d5 is held by the pawn, by the bishop, and by the rook. But Alireza's point is not to sacrifice one rook, but to sacrifice two rooks. And after pawn takes d5, he would do so with rook takes g5, which forces mate. For example, pawn takes, queen takes, and there is mate on g7. So after rook d5, Eric ignores the rook here to gain time to defend and to make sure he holds his rook on c5, which does defend along the fifth rank. He plays king h7. And Alireza is not to be deterred. He continues to sacrifice rooks with rook g takes g5, a winning sacrifice. But after pawn takes g5, and now queen takes g5, rook g8, Alireza does not play the correct move. That is knight to g7. This move threatens queen to h5 with checkmate, and Eric can only give up a lot of material to try to hold the game, but it is a losing position. However, there is a case of mutual hallucination. Alireza plays queen h4, and Eric finds the accurate defense rook to g6. But then, after knight to f4 check, it seems both players missed that rook h6 was possible and winning for black. So actually played is king g8, and there's another small tactic. Knight takes g6, pawn takes g6, and Alireza has the final stinging blow, f7 check, a discovery that wins the queen on d8 and wins the game on the spot. There may be no more titanic rivalry on Chess.com than Hikaru Nakamura versus Alireza Firouzja, and we look forward to many more great battles between these two players. We are going to finish this video with two excellent and beautiful attacks from Alireza. First, in this position, it's clear that Alireza has good compensation for the exchange, with an inconveniently placed king on f3 and an excellent square on e4 for the knight. However, it certainly doesn't seem that black should be winning. But let's note a key tactical detail. If Alireza could, he would play the move queen captures his own knight on f6. This would be check and would pick up the rook on b2 with an overwhelming positional advantage. Since he can't play that move, he can at least sacrifice the knight to gain access to the f6 square, and he does so with the beautiful move knight to g4. This empty square knight sacrifice is very, very strong. There are many threats emerging here, including knight to e5 with check, simply knight takes e3, and also various checks along the f-file. The critical point is that the knight cannot be captured because after king takes g4, queen to e6 check, there's no way to avoid placing the king on a square where it can be checked by the queen and then the rook on b2 falls, with more material to fall soon after. So, after knight to g4, Hikaru actually plays the move queen to d4, but then you simply have knight takes e3. Now, Hikaru is still up in exchange, but it really doesn't matter. The knight is amazingly placed here on e3. It covers g2, it covers g4, so the threat of check along the f-file is crushing. Queen h4 is played, and Alireza patiently plays queen to e5, attacking the rook and preparing a devastating check right here. In fact, Hikaru saw no reason to continue and resigned in this position. Our final example has been deemed an immortal blitz game by none other than a godmator, and who are we to question that assessment? However, this is also the only example that did not receive a brilliant annotation from our algorithm, possibly for correct reasons, but I think once you see this example, you will agree that there is a ton of brilliance in Alireza's attack, even if the engine can narrowly refute the idea. In this position, the bishop on b6 is in a lot of trouble, so Alireza decides to sacrifice it with pawn to d5. This is really the only try in the position because the black position is crumbling unless the attack succeeds. Now we get pawn takes b6, so Hikaru is up a bishop in this position, and knight takes g2. Again, whether or not this move works, it is brilliant because it is the only move that can pose a real challenge to Hikaru in this position. After knight takes g2, the critical question is, can Hikaru accept the sacrifice? It's certainly scary, but the answer is yes. He can take the knight. And after king takes g2, there's queen g6 check, king h1, and queen e4 with a very awkward pin. In fact, Hikaru does have to give back a piece here, but he can do so because he's up two of them. After rook g1, queen captures on f3 with check, and then rook to g2. Only white should win in this position. However, this is not the way the game continues. After knight captures g2, Hikaru tries a different move, knight to e5, a move that tries to totally interrupt the black attack. And now, in this position, the algorithm actually suggests that the next move is a missed win, but that really doesn't seem an entirely fair assessment. Alireza plays rook takes e5, an insane sacrifice. He's obviously leaving the knight hanging on g2, he's sacrificing his rook for this knight, And most importantly of all, he is sacrificing the rook on a8 with check. Now, it is possible to defend as white, but only to hold a draw and only with some crazy moves. However, more accurate than rook takes e5, but containing kind of the same ideas, is knight to f4. Also brilliant. And this move intends rook takes e5 in even better circumstances. It also allows some time for defense and is less forcing though. The most natural seeming defense is king h1, preparing rook g1 and rook g2, and it would take an absolute genius or a computer engine with a lot of time to think to figure out that in this position white's defense does not hold. You can play rook takes e5, which does again brilliantly sacrifice the rook on a8 with check. And here, after rook g1, you have rook h5, threatening rook takes h2 and then queen h4 check with mate. But now, rook to g4. If rook g2, by the way, you're just a little bit too passive, you can't give back material successfully here. Knight takes g2, king takes g2, you're only down a bishop here, and the attack is decisive after queen g6 check. But more natural is rook g4. So this doesn't work anymore because you're not able to go to h4 with check from the queen. So rook g4, queen f5, hitting this rook and eyeing this square. Rook over to g1, queen to e4 with check, rook to g2, which does utilize this pin right here, so you can't capture with knight takes g2. And in this position, the attack is decisive after the patient rook g5. There's simply no way to hold this pin. After, for example, queen to c8, trying to defend this, you just cut off that with pawn to f5. And here, you're still down a rook, but you're winning. It's really remarkable, and this is not the only line. There are other tries for white as well. But in all lines, black does win the game. In the game, though, instead of playing knight f4 immediately, Alireza tries rook takes e5. And now here we have queen takes a8 with check, which is actually very similar to capturing on e5 right away. But queen takes a8 check is, of course, more natural. Pick up a rook with check. If you can't hold it, then you can't hold it, but you've got to try taking the rook with check. King h7, and now there is an insane defense. It is the move pawn to f4. This move doesn't capture the rook, but threatens to capture it with two different pawns, and most importantly, it does not allow the rook to go to g5. The attack is still very strong for black, and once again, only a computer could properly assess this, but the accurate assessment is that it's a draw after knight takes f4 and other lines. We have pawn captures on e5, and the queen and knight are able to hold a perpetual check, but not deliver victory after queen g6 check, king f2. Of course, you can't go this way because this is mate. So now queen g2 check, and again, there are mates in the position, but after king e3, there's nothing better than queen to e4 check. The king must step back because here there are again mates after king to d2, queen check, and you either have a knight to e2 or a queen to e2 with checkmate. But after king f2, this is a draw by perpetual, an insane line. However, Hikaru does not find the incredible defense pawn to f4 really what human would. It would be a great reason to check any player for use of an engine if they could play f4 in this position. Instead, after pawn takes e5, white is up two rooks, but now queen to f3. There's simply the idea of knight out of g2 and queen to g2 checkmate. And in fact, it's a decisive idea. There's nothing better for white than to give back the queen with queen captures d5, which is what Hikaru does. But now you have queen captures on d5, rook ad1, and the very patient and accurate queen to f3, making sure there's no relief and all of the threats are renewed. Rook up to d3, giving back a rook, but after queen takes d3, there's not even time here to capture the knight on g2. I mean, you can do it, but then this falls here. Instead, Hikaru tries a slightly trickier move. Pawn takes c7, so he's threatening promotion down here, but promotion is not enough. The final move in the game is knight to f4, and the idea is to allow a new queen. White will again be up a rook, but you have queen to f3, intending queen to g2 with checkmate. You're also threatening queen to g6, and the queen will again make it to g2. There are a number of tries for white, but it is in fact mate in 5, and you can test it for yourself. A really stunning victory by Alireza. If you want to see more brilliant moves by players such as Hikaru Nakamura, then simply click on the videos that are popping up on your feed as I speak.